Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today in this, the third of an NMIS Insights session supporting Scottish Apprenticeship Week. This session is on the greening of apprenticeships and what we can learn from Europe. Earlier this week we heard from unions and from teachers, from stakeholders and from employers. And interestingly, one of the employers talked about the grey tsunami of their current workforce and how they see apprenticeships as a strategic enabler for them. And we're a huge supporter of apprenticeships at NMIS here. I'm sure you're desperate to hear from the speakers. So we have Lisa Rustico and Vlasis Korovilos from CEDEFOP. Lisa studied at 4 different universities in Italy and Cambridge before completing her doctorate at the University of Bergamo. Since then, she's worked as an independent consultant and researcher before joining CEDEFOP 7 years ago as an expert in learning and employability. Vlasis completed his Masters at Athens University before roles in project management and had his own business for a decade, so he really knows what SMEs need and what drives them. Vlasis joined CEDEFOP 9 years ago and leads the community of apprenticeship experts. Both Vlasis and Lisa are in the European Alliance for Apprenticeships as well. So I know you're very keen to hear from them. They're very keen to have a dialogue with you and engage with you and have conversation. Just before we do that though, some housekeeping and a brief introduction. So this webinar is being recorded, and by taking part you're giving your consent to that. The information will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards, and we'd really be pleased if you want to go back and look through that and share that with others. Your microphones and webcams will be turned off, although given we are a small but perfectly formed audience, we will have opportunity for questions and answers later on. We can spend a little bit more time on that. Any questions as we go through, just type them in the chat tool there, and we'd also really appreciate it if you complete our survey after the webinar, and that's the only way we can all get better. So what is NMIS? We're a group of industry-led manufacturing, research and development facilities working together to transform skills, productivity and innovation. And that's a really important point, that those 3 legs of the stool are all mentioned at the same time, and skills is an important part of that, all with an aim to make Scotland a global leader in advanced manufacturing. We're operated by the University of Strathclyde as the national asset, but supported by Scottish Government, Scottish Enterprise, Skills Development Scotland, Highlands and Islands Enterprise and others. And you can see we have a reach through to UK through the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. I'm not going to read all the aims there, but really the 2 key ones that are of value to probably most of the audience that are here today is the bits around about catalysing job creation and strengthening supply chain links through that, and inspiring and attracting talent to support current and future workforces with the skills that both individuals and the businesses need. So we have a core capability. We have specialist centres and an active network of partners across the length and breadth of Scotland and further afield, as you'll hear today. And our part is obviously the Manufacturing Skills Academy. We're involved all the way through from foundation apprenticeships in digital manufacturing, which kids complete whilst they're at school, all the way through modern apprenticeships, excuse me, graduate apprenticeships, CPD, doctorates, and working with Skills Development Scotland on the launch of a really new and exciting digital manufacturing apprenticeship later this year. So without further ado, I shall now pass you over to Vlasis and Lisa.
Thank you, Stuart. I will start. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting us here. I will share our presentation. Can you see it? I don't see the.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, yeah, great.
Fine.
Thanks. So, good morning, everyone. I am Lisa Rustico, and I'm here today with my colleague Vlasis Korovilos. We are experts in CEDEFOP in the Department for VET and Skills. And the idea is to offer to you today some selected insights and findings and reflections on the potential role of vocational education and training and apprenticeships for the green transition. This is based on CEDEFOP's work on this topic. CEDEFOP is the European Union Agency for the Development of Vocational Education and Training, and it is based in Thessaloniki in Greece. And what we do is basically participate in and contribute to the EU policy debate on topics relevant to VET and skills by carrying out research aiming at supporting an evidence-based, informed policy making. Our approach is a lifelong learning one, meaning that we cover both initial VET and continuing VET, so both young and adults. So Vlasis and I work in this department for VET and skills in an area which, as Stuart mentioned, is called learning and employability. So we look more at the VET response to external trends such as the green transition. And then there is another area which is called skills for the labor market that looks in fact at the labor market side of things. And I'm mentioning this because CEDEFOP's work on the green transition is structured more or less along these two lines. So our colleagues in the area of skills and labor market look at the employment effects, the skills requirement, and the policy implications of the overall transition. And they investigate the impact of environmental and climate change policies on future skill demands. And they accordingly shape recommendations for future VET policies. Their latest piece of work of our colleagues is this report that you see here and you can find in CEDEFOP website, which builds on our agency's long-term expertise in skills forecasting, and it is the 2020 Green Skill Forecast scenario to assess the likely impact of the European Green Deal on the employment structure in the EU 27 and also at a sectoral level. Then, as I said, there is the other part of work, meaning how VET responds, how VET policies can respond to the challenges, and in this case, how VET can fit and respond to the challenges linked to the green transition. And in our team, we look specifically at how apprenticeship can play a role to support this transition, and possibly, as we will see, even to foster it. Our latest initiative is a joint symposium which we organized with the OECD on apprenticeships for greener economies and societies, which took place last October. And we are going to publish the papers that were presented during the event in a publication that is forthcoming. It will be out by mid-May. And what we also have in the pipeline is a briefing note, which is a light product of CEDEFOP with a communication style open to all public. It's very short on the topic of VET and apprenticeships for the green transition. And this will also be published shortly. Now, as I said, the focus of our research, of course, is the EU, and we start from the European Green Deal, and we look at what its impact on employment and skills will be. So job-wise, the European Green Deal is good news for the EU because 2021 CEDEFOP skills forecast scenario, so the report that I've showed you in the previous slide, projects employment growth by 2030 to amount to about 2.5 million additional jobs. And the employment benefits are expected for all occupations at skill level. However, there will be differences across sectors. Of course, those with more greening potentials, the brown sectors, there will be various intensities and directions, differences over time. And here we would like to give you an, let's say, unusual example of these changes occupation-wise. And we think it's interesting for your sector, for manufacturing, where high skills are needed at a high level. So CEDEFOP coined these kind of jobs as thyroid occupations, meaning that the green transition will require some highly skilled new occupations Imagine in research and development, in engineering, or in very niche sectors such as hydrogen-based energy production that will be very critical for the functioning of the greening of the whole system, but they will be very small in numbers. So they will account only for a small share of green jobs, like the thyroid. No, it's very small, but it makes sure that the whole system functions. And this because the greener economy will rely on technical development and innovation. So we said more employment for all occupations at skill levels with differences. But in our understanding, the impact of the green transition will not be only on a specific set of occupations or in a specific set of sectors, but it will rather consist in a radical paradigm change that will impact on the design, production, transport, and consumption of goods and services, as well as a change in attitudes and behaviors of citizens. So when we talk about the green transition, we don't have in mind only greening of the economy, but also of the societies, and these two go hand in hand. And to achieve that, it's really key that learners and workers are offered the right skills across the board to upskill and reskill. And here we come to the role of VET. What role can VET play? What responsibility does it have? And we asked ourselves, is VET bound for a sprint or a marathon? Does it play a role only in the short term or in the long term? And the answer is both. So first of all, that must offer and can offer quick fixes to accompany the ongoing change. So it can offer sprint solutions, so to say, to keep up with change, mainly by mitigating skill mismatch in times of rapid change and also alleviate the social cost of this change. For example, short-term VET programs or modules of training programs can offer workers in regions that are hard hit by the economic transformation flexible opportunities. And this is true for all people in general, specifically also for vulnerable groups that can upgrade their skills and acquire new ones. Or another example is that VET is also relevant for upskilling solutions for people who enter or are already working in booming sectors, for example, to contribute to reduce recruitment bottlenecks. On the other hand, accomplishing the skills revolution in the longer term will be like training for a marathon. So to sustain the new green paradigm, so to say. So not only to respond to skill needs at all levels and across sectors, but also safeguarding people employability over time. This means, for example, providing transversal skills to all people, establishing or reinforcing multi-stakeholder platforms that also touch upon different policy areas. But also relying on forward-looking skills intelligence, or explore the role of VET in fostering innovations in greening technologies, processes, and products. So having said that, so this is the framework, what's the role of VET and how we look at it. We can now turn to see what the role of apprenticeship in particular could be in the short term and in the long run. And to do so, we will firstly show you some of the practices that we have collected, which demonstrate how apprenticeship can adapt to the training requirement of greener economies and societies. And I now leave the floor to my colleague Vlasis.
Thank you, Lisa. So good morning from my side too. Now we, as Lisa said, we will move on to a section of our presentation where we will see some specific examples of how apprenticeship support and adjust to the challenges related to the green transition. And at CEDEFOP, where we are collecting more and more evidence on how existing apprenticeship programs are already being adapted to changing needs due to the green transition, or how new programs, green ones, are being developed across sectors and occupations. And in fact, as we mentioned earlier on, in 2021, in October, CEDEFOP and the OECD held a symposium on apprenticeship for green economies and societies, where several interesting initiatives were presented and discussed. And we picked for you 4 cases today that show this, show how apprenticeship can have a role, can make a difference at various levels. I would like to point out that the slides that you will see come from the presentations that were used on that event, and I would like to acknowledge the contribution of the paper authors who made these presentations. So our first example comes from Belgium, the area of Flanders, and shows how a modular adaptation of an apprenticeship curriculum worked in the context of emerging needs for skills for the green transition. So in Flanders, there is after the 6-year-long secondary education, there is a 1-year additional program as an option offered to develop technical skills. At this level, there is one program leading to the qualification for chemical process techniques, CPT, and it's offered in the form of apprenticeship. That means that it combines workplace learning in a chemical company with theoretical knowledge at school. And in our case, in the region of Antwerp, it is also combined with a module delivered by a technical training center called ACTA. So the example that we present now is how ACTA recently redesigned the module they offer in the context of the apprenticeship program. And they did so to anticipate upcoming government regulations that will require energy-intensive industries to cut emissions. So the Training Center ACTA introduced gamification in the learning units of the use of the chemical equipment. This means that students can explore different operation modes, provided that they stick to the rule of not exceeding CO2 emissions that are set for the operation of a plant. So this motivates students to look for the most energy efficient way to operate their equipment, and also helps them to practice with the repercussions of so-called green crimes, which is part of this gamification approach. There is another effect from this approach, like a positive outcome, is that trainers encourage learners to reflect on current procedures and come up with innovative, eco-friendly proposals. That means that the solutions come from apprenticeships themselves, and this approach in turn has positive feedback on the training centers culture and the readiness and familiarizations of other staff to these topics covered by this module. What is also interesting to add in this case is that all this approach is based, all this adaptation is based on a new competence framework for the energy-intensive industry in Flanders. So there was a study on the skills needed by the energy-intensive industries, like chemicals, petrochemicals, primary metals, rubber, and plastics. And this was done for Flanders for 2020 to 2035, the so-called skills roadmap for the Flemish climate transition. And this paved the way for the adaptation that took place at the level of this module by the ACTA Training Center. Our next example comes from Germany and shows how in-company training, including through apprenticeship, is adjusted to support sustainability. So we move from the modular approach to the company perspective. We have the case of Siemens, which in any way puts emphasis on sustainability and had introduced a new corporate sustainability framework. So this example is about how a part of Siemens HR, the so-called Siemens Professional Education, which is the in-house education and training provider, adjusted the training that takes place within the company to meet the goals and the needs of sustainability. So to train staff, including apprentices, this SPE unit, the Siemens Professional Education, to train the staff on emerging skill needs, they ran the so-called innovation processes, one of which was focused on sustainability. So in this case, SPE ran a process which included analysis of external trends and discussions and identification of internal needs from business units. And through several rounds of consultation with staff, and external stakeholders and experts, they arrived at a learning pyramid, which is a competence framework within the company that presents what are the competencies required for sustainability at various levels, including the level of apprentices. So what do we have here? We have a process that leads to a common basis of the competencies required for staff, and more in particular, when it comes to apprentices, what are the competencies required for apprentices irrespective of their role and irrespective of the business unit. And for Siemens, these common core competencies are basic understanding, self-reflection, and reflection on business functions related to the targets of climate protection and sustainable development goals. This example shows how apprenticeship training is fully integrated in the company strategy to promote sustainability, and how this strategy helps develop specific goals in relation to what apprenticeships need to be taught. After the development of this pyramid, this competence framework, there were like several pilot projects developed on this basis, in this context, and all these project pilots were built in the logic of quick wins, meaning that they were short and they were designed to be implemented flexibly in various business units. And what is also important is that they were addressed both apprentices and the regular staff that could be trained together. And then we can move on to our next example. And we move from a company to a sector. So we will see the sectoral perspective. There was another case that was presented and discussed during our symposium. And this comes from the adaptation of different adaptation approaches that were followed within the sector in relation to the development of skills required for low energy construction. And we were presented the examples of Belgium and Germany, where this adaptation for low energy construction is based on extensive multi-stakeholder approaches. So the update of occupational profiles, the update of curricula, the update of examination regulations for apprenticeship in low energy construction was based in multi-stakeholder approaches. This represents also a broader approach on how curricula are adapted and the extent to which this adaptation takes place. These multi-stakeholder approaches seem to lead and favor a combination of a broad theoretical knowledge, for example, building of physics and materials, with an overview of the sector and with transversal skills such as communication, coordination, and teamwork skills. So this approach, called by the authors of the papers the high road to adaptation of apprenticeship programs to the needs of the green transition, is actually offering a holistic understanding of the construction process, and it helps develop an occupational capacity. In this respect, apprenticeships can help apprentices to become more independent. They can become flexible workers in the future, and they are more able to solve problems and take responsibilities and adapt to changing needs, both because they have a solid theoretical background and because they have been given the opportunity to develop transversal skills during their apprenticeship period. And in fact, this approach is actually making good use of what apprenticeship offers as a training option, because apprenticeships, since they combine different learning venues and since they offer learning experiences that cover theory, practice, and transversal skills, are in fact well positioned to support this kind of broad development of skills required for the skills transition. What is also important to note here is that the familiarization and the readiness of regular staff with these concepts and practices is indeed a key factor in the quality of the training that apprenticeships get in relation to transformations that happen in companies because of green technologies or new values or new business needs and customer preferences. So apprentices learn from regular staff, learn with them, next to them, and the more regular staff is familiarized and acquainted with these processes, the better the quality of what of the training that apprentices get. And then we can move on to our next example, which comes from Greece, and we move to one level up, which and we see how apprenticeships act as part of a wider system. So this example shows how the adaptation of apprenticeship for the green transition was supported by and then in turn accelerated transformations in its external environment. Apprenticeship is, contributes to this wider system. So the example comes from a pilot project called Graducation. It was a multi-stakeholder initiative that started in 2017 and aimed at developing green VET modules and services. And this project brought together various stakeholders from the education labor market side, also researchers, and these stakeholders came from Germany and Greece, so it was a binational project, and a form of international cooperation for VET and apprenticeship. For example, the German-Greek Chamber of Industry and Commerce was a central stakeholder that had a role in this project. So the project started with updating standards and introducing new programs, similar to what we have seen in the previous examples. And since 2017, there were like 3 green apprenticeship curricula introduced at the apprenticeship program that is offered in Greece at upper secondary level. And there were more modules expected for the post-secondary apprenticeship program. So in Greece, there are apprenticeship is offered at 2 different levels through 3 different schemes. And there were modern green standards and new technologies integrated in other programs as well. So all in all, about 10 occupations were involved one way or another in terms of new programs or update of standards of existing ones, like electrician, the technician for thermal and hydraulic installations, mechatronics, and ventilation, air conditioning, solar cooling. So it was a quite extensive update and introduction of new programs and standards. Then the project moved on to developing a related infrastructure that was missing, and it was a good opportunity to see how stakeholders work in this direction. So a green VET campus is being set up in the biggest coal mining area of Greece, in Kozani, in Macedonia, in collaboration with the Greek Employment Service and with local stakeholders and companies. And this VET campus should provide infrastructure and opportunities to apprentices and school-based VET learners to get familiar to concepts and practices regarding the development of skills required for the green transition. But it's not about these immediate outputs of the project that we picked this point. This example. We picked this example because as the presenters analyzed, this project is an excellent case of how apprenticeship is adapted on the basis but of broader transformations and how it influences these broader transformations. So first, apprenticeship helped and drove some transformations in the overall VET system. For example, it helped establish practices of common training of school teachers and in-company trainers, something that is relatively new for Greek VET, Greek vocational education and training system. Or it reinforced the importance of teaching entrepreneurship and introducing it in the vocational education training curricula. Then at the next level, there were transformations in the local labor market. because of this adaptation, as local labor market actors were invited to convey their needs and provide input for the development of this updated or new curricula. This is something that it was not a standard procedure in Greece. It wasn't given in Greece. Labor market side had a role in developing occupational profiles at a higher level, but were rarely given the room to directly influence the development of curricula. So this changed the cultural paradigm of how companies can inform training at the local level. And another transformation was in relation to the perceived prestige of veteran apprentices. In Greece, society sees vocational education and training, and even more so apprenticeships, as second chance options. And what the project did, and it was a very interesting finding of its application, is that by introducing these modern curricula on changing sectors and occupations, the project showed that apprenticeship can be relevant, can address and adapt to emerging trends, and can capture young learners' interest, as young learners are quite motivated about green issues. And one last transformation that happened in the context of this green adaptation of apprenticeship is that it helped change the self-image and self-esteem of apprentices. As the topics were rather new and the curricula were just being updated, school teachers do not have all the knowledge. They need to train themselves, they need to work with companies, and what is more important in the aspect that we examined, the project is that they need to involve and hear from apprentices, as apprentices bring practice from companies. So therefore, apprentices become more central to the learning process. They're more motivated to contribute. They have a room to explore, room to inform what is being taught, and they're in a better position to drive their own training. And we think this is an important mental transformation for young kids who often come from adverse background and have limited motivation and self-esteem due to the cultural perception of apprenticeship in the country. So all these examples that we presented come up from different levels, have like a different angle to show how apprenticeship can have a transformative power in countries, in companies, in sectors, when it comes to the transformations needed and the adaptation needed for the green transition. And we at CEDEFOP believe that apprenticeship can play a significant role in the short and the long run. As Lisa put it, apprenticeship is a suitable response for both sprint and marathon. The first two examples that I present to you referred more to the small scale, modular or pilot-based responses, more direct responses, more specific ones, subject specific or short term ones. But we also show in the other two examples that the same qualities that make apprenticeship fit for the sprint towards a greener future also make apprenticeship suitable also for the marathon that is needed. So we also showed these two examples from Belgium, from Belgium, Germany, and Greece that show how apprenticeship can have a more comprehensive, more profound, and long-lasting, forward-looking contribution in this process. Back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Vlasis. Yes, I'll just take the floor for a few minutes to conclude, and I will take it from where you left it, like why and how apprenticeships for the green transition. As you said, Vlasis, the evidence that we have and our knowledge of apprenticeship point to a potential role for apprenticeships, not only to support the green transition in the short term, but also to enable it in the long run. But the question why, I mean, what makes apprenticeship so relevant? And our answer lies in some of the characteristic features of apprenticeship as compared to other forms of VET. We're not saying defining features, but some of that we see as more prominently relevant for the green transitions. And these are the multi-stakeholder governance structures, the learning alternations, and alternation, and the fact that apprenticeship helps people transition into the labor market. So first, as we know, apprenticeships relies on a multi-stakeholder governance structure, which are solid, which are permanent. And this is a facilitating platform and an enabling platform for multi-stakeholder dialogue. As such, apprenticeship can be flexibly adapted to new skill needs, qualifications, and training content. Just to make an example, these structures, these platforms, these bodies are could be the arena to for early identification, so for the anticipation of the skills, of the skill needs that are required by the labor market to meet the needs of changing greening occupations. Second, the learning alternation. So the structured in-company training component alternating with off-the-job training and the practical learning approach are actually features that can trigger cross-fertilization between the learning venues and support green innovations from schools to companies and vice versa. And in these, apprentices, both young and adults, may play a role in their daily learning and working activities, for example, by suggesting changes or contributing with innovative ideas that can make the workplace greener. And in this sense, we talk about apprentices as agents of change. Apprentices being directly exposed to rapid changes happening in the work floor also have direct access to innovative practices and technologies, which make them readier for the labor market, for the transition into the labor market, which brings us to the third point. In general, apprentices, as they are rooted both in education and training and in the labor market, are best placed to accompany people in the employment transitions. And particularly adults. Why adults? Because experts agree that work-based learning learning formats such as apprenticeships are best suited to meet the needs of adult learners, sometimes even better than the traditional classroom setting. And the fact that apprenticeship builds on a contract and on a compensation, normally in Europe, an employment contract and pay, makes it an even more attractive option for all adults who want or need to obtain a green qualification. So as such, apprenticeship could be used as a tool for the upskilling and reskilling of workers, but also of job seekers. For example, to support their transitions from declining sectors to growing one, or for declining occupations to growing one, and in this way to contribute to the green transformation of regions. So there is a lot of potential there. But we know that there are challenges. There are some conditions that need to be met for apprentices to be able to take up this role of enabler of change and accelerator of the green transition. From our perspective in CEDEFOP, the first challenge is agreeing on what we talk when we refer to apprenticeships, because as we know, the term is associated to different meanings across countries and even within countries. So it is essential to agree on on the feature of the object that we are talking about. And in Europe, in the EU, member states agreed on a set of criteria for the quality and effectiveness of apprenticeship in 2018 with a council recommendation dedicated to that, the council recommendation on the European Framework for Quality and Effective Apprenticeship. This is a starting point, it's not an arrival point. Also, we in CEDEFOP in our analysis made a critical reflection on this framework, pointing to some areas for further improvement. But there are a number of more operational challenges that I will now list to you just in the forms of questions. We said that governance is a potential enabler. Fine, but is there real collaboration among the stakeholders involved in apprenticeship governance? Are, for example, social partners vested with decision-making powers in apprenticeship-specific bodies, or do they only have a consultative role? And do they sit in bodies that work on VET in general or in apprenticeship specifically? Second, are apprentices, both young and adults, offered complete and comparable learning experiences which allow them to achieve all the learning outcomes for the same qualifications? This is even more true when apprenticeship needs to prepare for an emerging occupation or a changing occupation for which the simple work experience is not sufficient. Then teachers and trainers. We know that they already have multiple roles. I mean, teachers and trainers in the context of apprenticeship, of course, like in-company trainers. We know that they already have multiple roles and responsibilities. So the question is, the challenge is, are these teachers and in-company trainers empowered and supported in facing these challenges? Are their roles and responsibility defined in a clear and sustainable way? And finally, we talked about the potential of apprenticeships for adult upskilling and reskilling. But we have to ask ourselves if adults actually do have access to apprenticeship, which is not the case in all countries, and if they are enabled to benefit from it. For example, it might be necessary to remove some institutional barriers, put in place specific incentives, which are financial or non-financial, such as the recognition of prior learning, or design specific training provision and learning approaches for adults. So to answer these questions, as we mentioned, we organized this symposium. For which so far there are available the paper summaries and the recordings of the event. I can put in the chat the link to our web page where you can find all these sources, and we have a publication that is forthcoming, as I said, in the next couple of months. So we also prepared some questions for you if you would like to pick them. To understand how does apprenticeship support the green transition in Scotland? Are new apprenticeship programs being built? The existing apprenticeship programs are being adapted, or for example, there is a work to make apprenticeships greener for the upskilling and reskilling of adults, or for example, you can share some examples of eco-innovation and the diffusion of green technologies through apprenticeship. These are just some questions that we can leave there for the discussion, but for the moment I would like to thank you for your patience and attention, and I'm leaving the floor now back to Stuart.
What can I say, Lisa and Vlasis? Fabulous presentation there. Some really great examples, some great case studies, a great coverage of deep diving and a kind of broad overview as well. And I mean, I've certainly got a few questions, but I wonder if there is anything from the floor. Anyone from the floor would like to ask any questions? Just put your hand up and we can unmute your mic. Question from Jim.
That's you, Jim. You should be able to speak now. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the presentation, guys. As Stuart said, really informative. It's probably more an observation of where we are with sustainability and apprenticeships is the terminology we've used. We've just recently completed a sort of short life working group that's came up with some recommendations, probably not as far-sighted at the moment as what we've seen today, but certainly there is some there's definitely some synergies, you know, around the challenges and then the recommendations. So yeah, I just wanted to reflect back on some of those questions from the perspective of phasing, and I think the work that you guys have clearly went through is probably a little bit ahead of us from a sustainability and apprenticeships perspective. That was all.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else, any questions? Well, maybe people are thinking of.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of quick thoughts. So one was you talked about the Green Crimes VR game. Certainly be interested in hearing a bit more about that. But also I think based on your experience, what would be the kind of 2 or 3 key things that, you know, we should be doing in Scotland to ensure the successful greening of apprenticeships?
Perhaps.
Maybe.
Can I?
Yeah.
I don't know,
You can cover the VR Green Crimes.
Yes. Okay. There's more about that on the presentation. As I put in the chat, the link to the event, to the October Symposium, where you have both the presentation PDF, but also the full recording. So there are more to that, and of course we will also publish all the papers in May. But okay, from what we have, in short, I would say that it's part of the this gamification approach that was followed in this modular, let's say, adaptation of apprenticeship in Flanders. So the idea is that apprentices are free to experiment, to explore. So this gamification worked in our understanding. It worked in 2 ways. One was to try to respect the limits, the CO2 emissions. So try to keep this a given, let's say, target in respect to CO2 emissions, and then they were free to change various variables in the mock-up production process. So they were trained in a training center. They were not in a real company environment, right? So they were mock-ups, and they were apprentices were free to experiment with that. In one aspect was keeping the set goals, and the other one was to let's say, in a way, exceed, to deviate. So the crimes, the green crimes, were what happens if they did not, what happens if when they do not respect some of the variables or the limits, the acceptable limits in the variables. So it was, let's say, learning from errors, from doing errors. So that was the idea. We don't have a very detailed description of what this entailed. Only the approach that I'm presenting to you. But we can, for sure, we can bring you in contact with the paper authors if you would like to hear more about how exactly they developed and what was the exact content of that. But it was the learning by how you call it, by error.
I think that would be useful, Vlasis. I do have a question here from Alison. Alison, I don't know if you want to ask yourself or you want me just to ask for you. If you want to ask, put your hand up. If not, I can ask the question for you. So Alison asks, is there a particular member state that is really ahead on greening apprenticeships and offering shorter apprenticeships for upskilling and reskilling adults? Sorry, Alison, just saw your hand go up there. Do you want to speak? Can you unmute?
That's
Alison,
you unmute, Alison.
Okay. Alison, shall we? I mean, not that we have an answer. Look, we don't have a consistent evidence to really answer your question because, as we said, CEDEFOP has just started working on this specific topic, and it is challenging because many of the things that we find are either related to VET in general, or they're not really specific to green relevant development. We know that developments. We know that Ireland and the Netherlands have a rather systemic approach to this adaptation of apprenticeship to greening, but this is not based on a systematic collection of evidence. This year, thanks to our community experts, including Stuart, we will collect more examples and more information of what is going on in the countries. Then when it comes to adults, not all countries open adults to open apprenticeship to adults. So also it is difficult to answer these questions. Vlasis, do you have something specific in mind?
I would like to just to add this dimension that this is also somewhat linked to what is the approach followed in updating curricula. So there is an approach that you try to focus on specific occupations as if you need to develop new programs in those specific ones. But there's also the approach that on top of that or instead of that, you as a country, let's say, or like as a vocational education training system or an apprenticeship system, you introduce green elements across specialties, across qualifications. And that was the case of in Germany when they ran a multi-stakeholder let's say initiative that ended up with updating standards across the spectrum of apprenticeship qualifications that are offered. So you can think this as being ahead on greening apprenticeship because of the extent, let's say, of the transformations that were brought forward. Now, about upskilling and reskilling adults, it's true what Lisa said, that we do not have like a systematically collected evidence across the table. And I think there's more to look at the sectors and more to look at the regions that face emerging the needs, like really pressing needs. And it is also something that we have seen from our analysis so far and the material that we have collected, that this regional sectoral dimension is really, really important when we're talking about this short-term response. And upskilling and reskilling is usually linked to that, to this, like direct, emerging, pressing response to alleviate the needs of workers moving from phased out industries. So no, I cannot think of like a specific candidate that. I think the question about upskilling and reskilling is not to be answered at a country level. Mm-hmm. We're very much interested to collect more data on that and make them available. But we have to admit that we are just unpacking, this box, and
also interested in learning about the Scottish approach, because maybe this is one of the countries that is most ahead, because you have this transversal approach of sustainability in all apprenticeships. And to go back to Stuart's question, what are the key things to ensure that apprenticeship can make it? I mean, there's not a recipe, but for sure, taking into consideration this systematic approach, a broader approach to sustainability is successful, because not, as we said, the green transformation is not something that has an impact only on a set of occupations or just in selected sectors. So having this approach that looks across the board is for sure an advantage. And this, of course, goes hand in hand or in parallel to an approach that looks at that tailors the needs, for example, adapting apprenticeship to sectors, as Vlasis was saying, to occupations. But also I would like to add a dimension that perhaps was not mentioned, the dimension of the skills ecosystem that comes more and more important, like of these ecosystem at local level where more stakeholders are on board, so where more policy domains are brought together. And that's where it is possible for apprenticeship to unlock its potential also, for example, in connection to innovation, as we were saying, or to addressing specific needs of specific target groups and so forth. So yes, involve all stakeholders and do not work in silos.
Thank you for that answer. Any final questions before we wrap up? Just a personal interest then from me is, have CEDEFOP done any work with Japan?
Actually, on the green transition, no, but we are covering Japan for a study on CVET, just on continuing vocational education and training, just to see how it works there in their segmentalist approach. Then I don't know in the past, honestly. I'm talking of, but I have another question. Why your question?
So you'll be aware of the Scotland leases, and we may in fact be working with a number of Japanese companies, so it'll be interesting to see if any work had been done in that area. Let's keep talking.
Yeah, and indeed it's not easy to find English-speaking researchers and experts in Japan, but maybe more in the business world. That might be easier.
Okay. Excuse me. I think that's just about us. I've got Jim's just saying thank you, Lisa and Vlasis. Very interesting, and a couple of thumbs up there. So
Pleasure.
I think in general, just would like to thank you both very much for today, and look forward to working with you going forward. This will be available on the YouTube channel, and obviously we'll try and promote it there as well. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you for listening.